Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Sophie was hit hard. She was confident that her conditions were excellent in all aspects, but in front of this man, was her excellence worth mentioning? "Run, you just don't know me yet. I'm not as bad as you think," she added without giving up. "There is a woman I like and want to marry, so you don't have to pester me anymore. Please leave." After saying that, he opened the door for her and forced Sophie to leave with a cold look on his face. Feeling extremely hurt, she walked to the door, but when she was about to turn back and say something, the door slammed shut. She then bit her lip, feeling aggrieved and unwilling. She then took a seat on the chair in the corridor without intending to leave. Meanwhile, Ruka's legs went a little stiff after hiding behind the curtains, so Rin quickly drew the curtains and pulled her out. Ruka threw herself into his arms at once. She had heard his cold rejection toward Sophie with her own cars. How could she doubt his feelings anymore? Ren then brought her to the couch. Ruka raised her head and looked at the man who had always been extremely gentle to her but acted absolutely cruel to other women. "What's wrong?" Ren blinked, for the way she stared at him made him a little flustered. In response, she pursed her red lips and shook her head. "Are you afraid that I'll be that cruel to you in the future?" Ren expressed her worries in a hoarse voice. Ruka wanted to say she was afraid, but she didn't want to express her distrust of him so directly. So she shook her head again. Ron sighed, not knowing how to comfort her at this moment. However, he knew that he wanted to pamper her and take care of her for the rest of his life. No one knew how this girl healed him when he was younger. She was like the light of his life. Ron also suffered from depression in his teenage years because his parents had high expectations for him. Ever since he became sensible, he suffered from academic stress. Other children his age were allowed to play outside. But he couldn't. He had to excel in every aspect, or else he would disappoint his father since he was the only heir to the Hassan family. Under such high-intensity pressure, Ren had a depressing youth, but he couldn't complain to anyone. After Ruka's arrival, she seemed to have healed him. Her cuteness, mischievousness, and his curious eyes always relieved his academic pressure immediately, making him feel relaxed. Even if she messed up, destroyed his books, hid his pen, or cried aloud, he never got annoyed. He always found her lovable. The 3 years he spent at his sister's house was the happiest of his entire childhood and adolescence. Even after he left their house, he never forgot about Ruka. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Ruka noticed that the man had been staring at her for a long time. Ren curled his lips into a smile, caressed her face with his big palm, and pressed his thin lips against her red ones. Before confessing in a raspy voice, "That's because I love you." He coldly refused another woman earlier but confessed to her affectionately right now. Ruka felt a little lightheaded. Even if she was the one being kissed, she returned his kiss and hugged his neck. On the other hand, Sophie was sorting out her emotions in the corridor on the 3rd floor. She would not give up so easily, but just as she was about to go to the bathroom on the 3rd floor, she heard the door of the study open. She wondered if Rin had come out. She stood at the corner and peeped her head out. Her eyes widened when she saw the scene. Why was there a girl in the room? At this moment, Ruka's hand was being held by Ren, and her cheeks had been colored crimson. Sophie was so shocked that she hurriedly retreated to the dark corner of the turning. She covered her mouth in disbelief. Was this the woman Ren liked? Was it her? Who was she? Sophie couldn't help biting her lip and was determined to find out her identity. Sophie's gaze was locked on them until they disappeared. Only then did she come out from the dark corner of the corridor. Currently, her eyes were filled with surprise and jealousy. She even deliberately scrutinized the young lady earlier, thinking she was just a part of the Hassan family. It now seemed that she had underestimated her identity. As soon as Sophie got down to the second floor, she saw a maid who was done cleaning up. She couldn't help but stop the maid enthusiastically and inquired, "Excuse me, may I know who the girl wearing the yellow coat in the hall is?" The maids here knew Sophie's identity, so they were very polite and respectful to her. Naturally, they answered her quickly, "Miss Liamson, you must be talking about Miss Singed, right? She is Miss Hassan's goddaughter." Her goddaughter? Sophie's eyes widened in shock as she asked again, "Are you saying that Miss Singed is Miss Scarlett Hassan's adopted goddaughter?" "Yes. Miss Singed's parents are also guests today," replied the maid. Sophie endured the shock in her heart and uttered, "Okay, thank you." As she went downstairs, she digested the news. Ruka turned out to be Scarlett's adopted daughter, so what was the relationship between her and Ron? Wasn't it a messy relationship? They shouldn't be together. A goddaughter was also considered a daughter, after all. How could they mess up the generations? Ruka must have seduced Ron. She noticed the couple beside Ruka earlier. They looked like an ordinary couple and definitely did not belong to the riches. Ruka might not have been content with being just a goddaughter, so she wanted to take the position of the mistress of the Hassan family. At the same time, she could even enjoy the title of the vice president's wife. When Sophie thought about it, she finally understood everything. In her eyes, Ruka was an ambitious person who was more adept than her. Sophie couldn't help but sneer. How unlucky she was to have met someone like Ruka. She decided that she would never let someone like Ruka get her hands on Ron. This man was her goal, so she had to grab the opportunity regardless. By the time Ruka returned to the hall and sat beside her parents, she took off her outer coat, revealing a plain and elegant white dress inside. After getting scared by Rin upstairs earlier, her back was covered in a cold sweat. How could she even feel the coolness? All she felt was the warmth in the room. She needed to get some fresh air outside. "Mom, I'll head for a walk in the garden and look for Angela at the same time," Ruka informed her mother. "Sure, but don't venture too far," Claire reminded. As the Coulters were gathered together talking about their children, the children all agreed that they didn't want to stay there, so all of them left the table at the opportunity. With that, Ruka went out to feel the cool breeze. At that moment, Sophie happened to pass by in the corridor beside the floor-to-ceiling window. She couldn't help but notice Ruka by the garden pool. A sneer flashed in her eyes, and she came out from a side door. Currently, Ruka was watching a few fish swimming in the fountain pool. She was envious of them, seeing how freely they swam around. Hearing footsteps behind her, Ruka hurriedly turned her head and saw Sophie walking toward her with graceful steps, with a smile on her face. "Hello, Miss Liamson," Ruka took the initiative to greet her. "Hi, Miss Singed." Sophie folded her arms in front of her, showing off her superior attitude. Ruka could tell that she came without good intentions, so she became alert and questioned, "Why are you looking for me, Miss Liamson? Where have you been? I don't think I saw you just now." Sophie asked her deliberately. Ruka instantly felt nervous. Why did Sophie ask her that? Had she found out? In response, Ruka asked, "Is there a specific reason you're here to see me? You should know who I am. I am the candidate for future daughter-in-law appointed by Mrs. Hassan, and all of them like me very much. I heard that you're the goddaughter adopted by Miss Scarlett Hassan, so you will be calling me Aunt Sophie in the future." Sophie couldn't help but smile in a complicated way. Ruka squinted her eyes and countered in neither humble nor haughty tone, "I'll definitely call you that when you become my aunt-in-law one day." However, she knew that there was no way Sophie would attain the said position. Sophie looked at Ruka, not wanting to beat around the bush anymore. She inched closer to her, leaned into her car, and said, "Ruka, I know what you and Ren did in the study just now." Ruka's expression changed suddenly as she glanced at Sophie. Did she find out that she was hiding behind the curtains just now? "I don't understand what you're talking about." Ruka played dumb. Sophie's expression sank as she sneered and said, "Being the goddaughter of the Hassan family isn't enough for you, huh? You're dreaming of becoming their mistress, aren't you? Did you think you'd be able to hide the fact that you secretly seduced Rin behind all the elders of the Hassans? Not from me, though. If you don't want me to expose your wild side in public, you'd better stay away from Ren." Ruka's face turned pale, paler than the white flowers blooming next to her. She clenched her fists tightly, never expecting Sophie to discover her relationship with Ron. Watching Ruka's reaction, Sophie was delighted. She probably had a grasp on Ruka's weakness. "Do you think I should go to the hall and report it to Mrs. Hassan? Should I tell them how scheming her goddaughter is, seducing her perfect son behind her back?" While confronting each other, neither of them noticed that there was a girl standing behind the bushes. Angela had come to look for Ruka, so she overheard Sophie's words from beginning to end. Even Angela didn't expect Sophie would dare to threaten Ruka like this at the Hassan residence. Recalling how she tried to hit on her husband earlier, she was certain that Sophie was the one with bad intentions. "Ruka, you're here!" Angela called out, stepping out from behind the bushes. Sophie immediately turned to look at Angela. She had just threatened Ruka, so it was unpleasant to be disturbed like this. At the same time, Ruka felt like her savior had arrived, so she breathed a sigh of relief while calling out, "Angela." Angela stretched out her hand to hold Ruka, then looked up at Sophie. "You're here too? I forgot to introduce myself earlier. My name is Angela, the granddaughter-in-law of Mrs. Hassan." When Sophie was in the hall just now, she had witnessed Angela's silent warning to her, so she didn't like her either. She smiled and greeted, "Hello, I'm Sophie. Ruka, they have prepared some refreshments over there. Let's go over and have some." After speaking, Angela didn't bother to invite Sophie. "Miss Liam's son, please help yourself." Angela made good use of her advantage as a part of the Hassans. In this case, Angela was the official family member of the Hassans, while Sophie was nothing. Sophie couldn't help clenching her teeth secretly. She secretly vowed to show her pride and trample Angela on her feet once she successfully became the mistress of the Hassan family. On the other hand, Angela dragged Ruka out of the garden as they walked to a lounge in the center of the pavilion. Ruka pursed her lips, wondering whether Angela had overheard what Sophie said to her just now. Angela was not someone who liked to hide things. She read Ruka's concerned mind and decided to take the initiative to talk about it. "Ruka, I heard what Sophie said to you just now." After Angela said that, she quickly comforted her, "Don't worry though. I'm on your side." Ruka blinked in shock. Did you really hear everything?" Angela held her hand and answered, "Yes, I know everything, including the relationship between you and Uncle Ron. I know everything, but don't worry, I support your relationship." Ruka's eyes widened in shock. Angela's words were like a test of her endurance. She knew everything but still supported them? Well, such an excellent man like Uncle Rin should be kept within the family. How could we allow someone like Sophie to obtain the benefits? You're at the appropriate age for marriage, and you're not blood related to the Hassans. It makes sense that you two would want to be together. Don't fret about what others think." Ruka was stunned by Angela's words, but her heart was filled with gratitude and joy. Did someone finally think it was reasonable for her to be with Run? Thank you. Angela, Ruka took her hand, feeling the warmth of being supported. Angela burst out laughing. Should I call you Aunt Ruka now? Ruka instantly blushed with her head lowered. At any rate, these generational issues were indeed messy. She bit her red lips, so embarrassed that she didn't know what to say. Angela stopped teasing Ruka and reached out to hug her. No matter what our titles are, we'll decide on that when the time comes. Right now, the most important thing is that you guys are together. I promise that Richard and I will support you. Ruka felt anxious all of a sudden. Richard. As long as I'm on your side, he wouldn't dare to oppose me. Angela huffed. Ruka looked at her gratefully. Although Angela's words did not represent everyone else's opinions, her support was enough to warm her heart. Miss Singed, Mrs. Lloyd, you're all here. Lunch is starting soon over at the hall, informed the maids. Ruka and Angela exchanged glances and walked toward the hall, arm in arm. Meanwhile, Sophie was already sitting at the table, and Mrs. Husson had arranged for her to sit beside Ran. Although he had not come down yet, they were clearly seated together, so Sophie glanced at Ruka intentionally. Ruka sat beside her parents, while Angela also sat beside Richard. He then looked at her with a meaningful gaze as her words today had also startled him. Why hasn't Ran come down yet? Mrs. Husson asked the maid. Mr. Husson is in a call upstairs. He must be busy settling his work. He'll come down soon. This boy always has a busy schedule. It's so difficult to even mote him. Mrs. Husson complained to everyone at the table. While saying so, they could tell she was proud of her son. Only Scarlett could respond to her mother. She smiled and replied, if Ran isn't doing well, you'd be anxious, but now that he's doing well, you still nag about him. As soon as she said that, everyone laughed, but Mrs. Husson sighed and replied, he's good in everything besides his marriage. After she finished speaking, she looked at Sophie again with joy in her eyes. When she heard Mrs. Husson's words earlier, Sophie lowered her head shyly. After that, she turned to look at Ruka with a triumphant smink. Watching that scene, Ruka felt heartbroken. At this moment, Ran's tall and handsome figure stepped into the doorway. He glanced at the empty chair at the table, whereas Angela came up with a plan. She quickly got up and said to Ran, Uncle Ran, please sit here. After speaking, Angela got up and sat next to Sophie. She then linked her arms with Sophie and uttered intimately, Miss Liamson, I like you so much. Let's sit together. Sophie instantly settled. She could tell that Angela was deliberately separating her and Ran. Watching them, Richard was also slightly puzzled. He knew what was going on in his wife's mind. Therefore, Ran sat down beside Richard. He held up the teacup and looked at Ruka from the edge of his cup. The girl was seated diagonally opposite him. Ruka raised her head and met his gaze. Then, she pursed her red lips nervously and lowered her head. After Richard was reminded by Angela, he deliberately turned his gaze to his uncle and found that although he was drinking tea, he was actually looking at Ruka. Men understood men best, so Richard instantly felt a tug at his heartstrings. Could Angela be right about them? Come on, let's raise a toast together for our gathering today, said Scarlett as she stood up. Except for the two elders who did not stand up, everyone else got up and clinked each other's glasses. The atmosphere instantly became cheerful. After the first glass of wine, everyone started to dig in. Sophie could not help but gently asked Ran, I'd like to eat some fish. Can you get some for me? You want some fish? Let me help you. Angela was the most proactive one and quickly grabbed a piece for Sophie. The latter silently cursed her for ruining her chances. Richard knew what his wile was getting at, and he smiled dryly. Come dig in. Angela, Charlotte told Angela and even called out to Ruka. And you too, Ruka. Look at you, all skin and bones. Eat. Ruka pursed her lips with a smile. Of course, Grandma. She felt Rin shooting her a conflicted look. Sophie smiled. You're the youngest one in the family, huh, Ruka? Scarlett's goddaughter? I heard she likes you the most. Here, a toast for you. She was reminding Ruka that she was the youngest around for a reason. Sophie wanted to push her down and keep her subservient. Thank you, Miss Liamson. Ruka raised her glass half-heartedly and returned the toast. I envy Ruka. She has 2 moms and 2 dads. Harold, Charlotte, and Uncle love her too. Sophie continued. Ruka bit her fork. She was a little panicked. Honestly, she was so nervous, she didn't even dare to meet Ren's gaze. She was worried Sophie might tell everyone about her relationship with him. She didn't want that dream to happen in real life. What if his family wells at him? What if he hurts them because of us? Well, I mean, everyone's different, Miss Liamson. For example, some people aren't loved by their family, unlike Ruka is. Don't you think so? Angela snapped. Sophie shut up and laughed at herself. I guess so. I'm not as lucky as she is. Ruka stood up and announced, I need to use the bathroom. She left the room quickly, and Ren looked at her, worried. He held his phone up. I'm gonna make a call. And then he left as well. Sophie stared in the direction they left. Angela rested her chin on her hands. Stop staring, Miss Liamson. Dig in. She then looked at Richard and winked. It was as if she was saying, see? I hit the bullseye. Richard's brows knitted together. That's not the problem here. This is a complex case that needs to be dealt with. The bathroom was just an excuse for Ruka to get some fresh air. The tension was too much back in there, and her heart kept thumping furiously. It almost suffocated her. A gust of cold wind blew across her the moment she came to the garden, causing her hair to willow in the wind. She had taken her coat off, so she was wearing nothing but her white dress. The cold air was making her shiver. She wanted to back away. Then again, someone pulled her into a warm embrace. It surprised her. She looked back and saw Ren. He looked worried and sympathetic. It's cold out here, so why did you come out? He led her into a greenhouse where the heater was on. Ruka pulled her hand back. She was worried some servant might come out and see them. He sighed. Don't take what Sophie said to heart. She's just an outsider. She didn't want to tell him that Sophie threatened her before. It would just give him unwanted pressure. She nodded. Sure. I don't really mind what she said. Back in the dining room, Claire had also excused herself to go to the restroom. She thought she would run into her daughter there, but she didn't see her, even when she was done relieving herself. It annoyed her. It's mealtime. Where's that girl? We're guests here. She can't run around. She's not a kid anymore. Claire was a strict mother. She went to look for her daughter so she could take her back to the dining hall. Going back alone was clearly rude.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.